Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to a wonderful Wednesday webinar. Tonight we've got a real treat for you, Jonathon Porritt, who's been a legendary campaigner for the last 50 years of environmental movements. He's been very involved right back from before the Rio Earth Summit, the Ecology Party, which became the Green Party, former director of Friends of the Earth, absolute legend of the environmental movement. So, Jonathon, thank you so much for coming. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phoenix. Delightfully short introduction, which I appreciate. I'm not quite going to go back when we were just waiting for people to join. You suggested I might go right back to the start. I'm not going to go there because that would be 1974 onwards. I joined the Green Party, or Ecology Party as it was then, in 1974. I am, however, going to go back to 1977. As the starting point for what I want to share with this very experienced, knowledgeable group of people. Because it strikes me that although we've been in this world for a very long time, many of us are still kind of just coming to terms with the true depth, criminality, corruption of the fossil fuel incumbency that we are living in. And I spent the last year working with Just Stop Oil, and in particular with 26 of its younger activists. It's been an extraordinary experience for me personally, and I'll say a little bit more about that later, but it's really focused my mind on the degree to which the fossil fuel incumbency is not just the elephant in the room, it is the entire space about why we've failed entirely to rise to the challenge of accelerating climate change, basically. And 1977 is a very interesting year, it has to be said. I've been 3 years into my life as a Green Party activist. I didn't notice this in 1977, it has to be said, but then nobody did. But 1977 was the year in which Exxon scientists first presented to their board the deliberations, or the outcome of their deliberations, about what would happen if Exxon and other oil companies, fossil fuel companies, succeeded in all of their ambitions to have a massively successful global industry producing more and more oil and other fossil fuels that might come with it. Gas was mentioned at the time. What would happen if it was an absolutely rip-roaring success of an industry that dominated not just the energy economy, but the global economy? And Exxon scientists at that time, in the mid-1970s, were asked to go away and give some insight into what might happen if this success came true. And of course, we all know the success did happen. We all know that what those scientists in Exxon were talking about at that time was astonishingly accurate by way of understanding the impact on the global environment and on Earth system sciences, and in particular on the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And 1977 was one of those critical years where those scientists presented to the board of Exxon their conclusions about what would happen. And with a remarkable degree of accuracy, and Harvard has been doing some brilliant work on this, kind of retrospectively looking at the degree to which those scientists were astonishing in their ability to look forward into the future. Of course, we now can use all the IPCC models that we've got available to us since 1977. We can do massively complex stuff. Actually, the Exxon scientists at that time were pretty good. And they were very clear that if the industry succeeded, if volumes of production increased according to their growth projections, if emissions followed that growth, that we would be looking at a 2-degree centigrade rise in average temperatures by the middle of this century. So there you have it. And for me, that, I suppose, is the start of what I'm talking about tonight, which is this massive betrayal, not just to people alive today, but of all generations, and particularly young people today, but all generations to come. And it's useful to have a date for this, because when you're talking about betrayal, you're talking about generational betrayal, you need to have some idea about where we need to go to for accountability, responsibility, guilt, blame. Because otherwise it's just a kind of vague thought that, oh dear, we could have done better than that. Well, yeah, we could have done better than that. But the truth is that at the end of the 70s, this astonishing criminal conspiracy started, where the fossil fuel companies, hell-bent on the growth that they knew would benefit their shareholders very, very well indeed, they became involved in a sequence of activities which has led to the situation we're in today. And when I was writing Love, Anger, and Betrayal, sorry, this is the first plug in of the evening, but I might try and get one more plug in at the end. And after all the interviews that I'd done with these young activists who were angry about the fossil fuel companies, pretty much the only time that they expressed anger, they didn't really express much anger about the politicians. They just thought the politicians were kind of creatures of the system, captured by the incumbency as much as anybody else, not really having the agency required to deal with the depth of this incumbency. And I tried to construe what they were saying, and I used this analogy. The easiest way to understand the astonishing reach of the fossil fuel incumbency through the eyes of activists today is to see it as a global imperial power, operating in every corner of the earth, regardless of the political status of countries, whether they're democracies, autocracies, or failing states, subject only to partial and ineffective regulation by those countries once they have been effectively captured by the incumbency. This is achieved by the limitless amounts of money and other inducements the industry has deployed throughout that time to persuade politicians where their best interests lie. Equally limitless amounts of money are available for marketing and advertising campaigns of every description, for sponsorship activities, and of course for high-profile charitable works. We saw the absolute high point of this incredibly successful imperial endeavor, nearly 50 years of imperialistic incumbent behavior in our societies. We saw the high point of that in 2024 during the presidential election, when Donald Trump, with his usual lack of any recognition of what is or isn't appropriate, went out there and said, well, if the industry can find a way of getting $1 billion into my presidential campaign, I think I should be able to make things work for them once I'm president. So the asking price was there explicitly, $1 billion. The asking price has always been there in America. There is a price that you pay to buy a member of the House of Representatives. There is a price that it will cost the industry to buy a senator. There is a price that is paid at local community levels by the fossil fuel industries to buy positions of influence on all of those local democratic institutions that still make America tick. So America, as the world's most astonishing corrupt power in the world, all of which is completely legal. So it's a totally legal corruption that we're talking about, because it's permitted by US law. At that point in that election, Donald Trump had the honesty, what would you call it? I guess, panache, to go there and say, yeah, I'm your guy. It's going to cost you. It's going to cost you $1 billion. And there are all sorts of ways you can do this. You can put it into my PAC, you can put it through this channel, you can do this, you can do that. And of course, we're not yet certain how much the flow into the Trump election campaign amounted to at the end of the day. various analysts have come up with at least 450 million of explicit donations from direct or indirect fossil fuel interests. I bet by the time the analysis is done and dusted, we'll get to $1 billion without any difficulty whatsoever. Now, I call this the kind of apogee of the power of the fossil fuel industry, because it's a massive victory. I mean, what's happening in America defies belief, and every single one of the campaign organizations that I, and I'm sure many of you have worked with over the years, is actually in a state of shock. Everybody knew it was going to be difficult. Everybody knew that Trump would seek to undo the Inflation Reduction Act, that Biden's still relatively limited impact in this world would completely be undone. And so that has come to pass. But now, way, way beyond that. So anybody daring to bring forward new investments in renewables will find their path blocked by one means or another. It's perfectly possible that tax will be levied on renewably generated electricity systems. And right now, as you know, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, is in the process of dismantling the critical infrastructure on which all regulation about endangerment, about greenhouse gases causing a health issue to US citizens today and tomorrow, that is almost certainly now going to be undone. And when I describe this as a state of shock, I honestly think that's what it is. They knew it was going to be bad. I don't think, I didn't read a single analysis before the election of exactly what would happen. So it's a massive victory. Let's be quite clear about this. No time for naivety now. I suspect it'll prove to be a massive Pyrrhic victory, because as we know, this cannot hold. This state of affairs cannot continue. We don't know when it'll cease, but it cannot continue. But the thing that I just want to touch on tonight is the generational aspect of this, because since 1977, at many different points in the intervening years, there have been opportunities for politicians, primarily, but for others in society, to combine forces and put the incumbency within a much more constrained set of parameters, to limit its power, to force it to play a different role in society as a whole. And I'm sure we've all got our list of what those moments were, but they are crucial because they're the battles that we thought we might have won along the way, but of course they all turned out to be losses. Going right back to 1992, to the Earth Summit, when the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was signed into being. I was there, I saw the politicians, I thought, bloody hell, we're off to the races now. We can really do this. Together with the Convention on Biological Diversity, these two huge international legal structures will give us pretty much everything we need now to start putting in place a very different way of interpreting prosperity, growth, and so on. All, of course, complete pie in the sky, as we, I guess, knew by 1997 when the Kyoto Protocol came into being. Even as that was signed into being, it became clear that that in itself would only fail. It could only fail. There would be nothing in America that the politicians could persuade the fossil fuel industry to put up with. There was no grounds on which consensus could be achieved. And between the Kyoto Protocol and 2015, the Paris Agreement, frankly, it was just a hugely successful campaign funded by the fossil fuel companies to ensure that no proper decisions were taken as to the what would need to be done to reduce annual emissions of greenhouse gases from the burning of fossil fuels. Very hugely successful. Everybody realized by Paris, by 2015, that the Kyoto Protocol had failed, there was nothing working, and then there was this new outpouring of hope in terms of the Paris Agreement. God knows why. I can genuinely say I've been a skeptic about the Paris Agreement from 2015 onwards, and have been on the receiving end of Christiana Figueres' wrath for daring to suggest that this was absolutely no different from anything that had gone before. But so it has proved to be, and I'm not saying that to say how smart I am. I'm not. It's just that it was obvious in 2015 this was going the same way as everything else. So that's the international diplomacy bit. There have also been moments where politicians could have seized hold of the public mood and done something with it and actually begun to address these challenges. I now, working much more closely with radical climate organizations like Just Stop Oil and others, I'm bound to go back to 2018, which for me was a moment where this extraordinary campaign generated by Greta Thunberg and her one-person strike for the climate, school strike for the climate, led, as you know, 15 months later to more than 1 million young people out on the streets of capital cities the world over, led to some incredible changes in what governments thought their people wanted to make happen. And we're so, honestly, I look back and I think, my God, this was just an astonishing time for those who thought that the power of public will really could begin to affect decisions taken by governments, not just here in the UK, but in many other parts of the world. Now, for all sorts of different reasons, as we know now, that came to nothing. COVID actually pretty much killed the radical climate movement at that time. There are lots of other reasons why perhaps it didn't fulfill the potential it could have done, but COVID was an absolutely massive blow to people trying to progress that kind of more radical climate voice here in the UK and elsewhere. So that for me was the last moment. And I look now at where young people see themselves and their sense of betrayal by older generations. And I am bound to say that we are now looking at 50 years of systematic betrayal of everything that they might have asked and expected of us. So for me, it was extraordinary when I began to talk with Just Stop Oil campaigners and decided then to focus on younger campaigners. I mean, I'm full of admiration for the organization as a whole. I know it's hung up the high vis now a few months ago, and it doesn't exist in the same way that it did for 3 short years, very short years. But I've been a supporter of Just Stop Oil from the start. But I decided to work with young people because my interest is in intergenerational justice. And that's because of my interest in sustainable development and the Brundtland Report going back to 1987. Agenda 21 came into this stuff, of course, from 1992 onwards. One of the most brilliant outcomes of the Rio summit was this thing called Agenda 21, and local Agenda 21 became astonishingly influential throughout the UK and many other countries. I'm often reminding people that but at the end of the Tony Blair time in government, or the Blair-Brown time in government, 93% of local authorities had their own local Agenda 21 campaign. It's their own office. They were all sort of reporting on what they were doing against 100 different indicators. The National Audit Office was checking up to see whether or not they were doing what they were doing. I mean, it was an astonishing moment. You look back and now you think, wow, really? That was happening here in the UK at the local government level? Yeah, it was. So for me, the concept of sustainable development has always been what moves me. I'm not really I don't like to be described as an environmentalist because I don't see myself as that, because too much environmentalism has no interest in social justice, has no interest in human rights, has no interest in what we should be doing about the state of our democracy, and no interest in sorting out capitalism. And if you're that kind of environmentalist, you're fuck all use to anybody. So basically, for me, sustainable development has been the means by which we can integrate deeper, different concerns about the nature of the global economy and what we need to do about it and so on. And you all know, because if you're not grizzled veterans, you're something quite close to it, that at the heart of sustainable development lies this Brundtland-based definition that one generation mustn't meet its own needs in such a way that it destroys the life chances of future generations to meet their needs. A very famous definition. You barely hear it these days, because guess what? sustainable development has been disappeared as a useful concept. So I wanted to work with Just Stop Oil's young campaigners because I felt that was closer to my set of concerns. And for the last 15 months, I have been genuinely privileged to get to know a lot of them, to interview them, to have conversations with many of them, to visit several of them in prison, to understand what drives them and why they found themselves, as they put it, with no choice other than to take the kind of actions that they took. And it's a very interesting issue because it is that black and white for a lot of them. They look at the same data that we look at. They look at the same issues about tipping points. They kind of know the science incredibly well, surprisingly well, if I can put it like that. And they look at that and they just think, whoa, okay, that's what we're looking at now. 1 meter sea level rise minimum by 2100. Gradually worsening conditions, whether it might be in terms of floods or droughts or wildfires or whatever it might be. Tipping points. They know a lot about tipping points in the Arctic and the Antarctic, a lot more than most environmentalists do. So they look at all that stuff. They look at what leading scientists are saying, perhaps the ones who aren't bang in the middle of the scientific establishment, but not the outliers, just the radical climate scientists who've been saying this stuff now for 10 years. They look at all that and they say, nobody's telling me those scientists are lying, well, other than the crazies, the continuing climate denialists and so on, but sensible people are. So what am I meant to do with that information? Am I meant to sit back and wait and just see our generation and all future generations in every country around the world hammered as the impacts of this crisis deepen by the year? I can't do that. Morally, I can't do that. And I've been very moved by that. I think probably some of us have lived with our own sense of not having been able to make the impact we might have wanted to make for too long. And to hear people, I'm 50 years older than almost all of them, there are a couple of in their late 20s, but to hear them speak with such absolute moral clarity, with deep knowledge about nonviolent direct action and predecessor movements, whether it's the suffragettes or the climate, the human rights movements of one kind or another, it's been really extraordinary. So we worked together on the book, and half the book is written by me and half the book is written by them in terms of their own opinions and views and hopes and fears about this, as a profile of each of the 26 campaigners. And what I've learned from that is that this concept of intergenerational justice, which has been my kind of core as a sustainable development advocate and practitioner for my entire life, the concept of intergenerational justice has been turned completely on its head. Instead of my generation, older generations doing what they need to do to make the world a better place for future generations, what we see now is younger people doing what they feel they need to do, not just to protect future generations, but to make it less awful for my generation. To step up and try and force politicians to do what really they need to do. So intergenerational justice, what does that mean for me now? It's a powerful concept with enormous historical resonance, but I have to say right now we're seeing a betrayal of such deep, systematic intensity that I can't talk about intergenerational justice any longer, because there isn't any. It is just a terrain of total betrayal. So that's where I've got to, Phoenix, in terms of my little personal journey. And it's an interesting place to be as a former director of Friends of the Earth and member of the Green Party and all the rest of it. It's good to be back into the relatively uncompromised situation of campaigning again.
That's absolutely brilliant, Jonathan. It's real inspiration to hear you speak, actually, and just brought something up for me. Actually, when I was getting arrested at Twyford Down, the policeman said to me, "I'm a member of Friends of the Earth. I pay my, £10 a year or whatever it was." And it's, the incredible work you've done to penetrate all levels of society with Friends of the Earth, and right up to the cutting edge now of supporting the younger generation of protest movements. And it's so important what you were speaking there about intergenerational and learning from the previous movements is so important. We stand on the shoulders of giants. We are here because of the trade union movement and the suffragettes and the diggers and the levelers and and the Ecology Party and the Green Party
Mm.
pioneering things really to get these conversations out there to a lot more people, and right up to the road protest to XR and the present movements. There's quite a few questions there in the chat. I think maybe 5 or 6 quite good ones. Maybe we'll go to the people who've asked them, but if you want to have a little scan of them back to, I think Shreya's got the first one there about younger people getting involved. Shreya, did you want to say your question? There's 55 people in. Shreya.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Jonathan. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm a young person and I'm also from the global south. So I was wondering, what's the best way for a young person to get involved in climate justice today, and what's the best way to do it? We don't want to waste time doing things that are ineffective. So what would you say is the best thing to do? And what are your words on the global north's responsibility towards handling and tackling climate justice? Yeah, thank you.
I'm hesitating, Shreya, because I've always been slightly reluctant about recommending what anybody should do at any one point. I always hated that kind of situation where you were put on the spot and somebody sort of asked you a lifestyle question. Well, what's the most important thing? Should I stop eating meat, or should I stop flying, or should I do this or do that? And I've always felt very uncomfortable about that stuff, because you want people to sort of dig deeper a bit and think about this, which you've obviously done. In the context of what young people can do right now, the thing that I know that my 26 co-authors would say, so I'm going to channel them for a minute. I feel I can do that, having spent a lot of time with them. Their first thing would be to say, just find out what is going on. I think it's been an astonishing thing for them, because a lot of them have been, the majority being at university, astonishing to find that most of their fellow students know practically nothing about what's actually going on, and don't particularly want to know what's going on, have an inbuilt sense of, not sure that's going to improve my quality of life, my state of mind, whatever it might be. So the first thing they would say is, if you don't have an obligation to become a direct action campaigner, like we have been in Just Stop Oil, but you do have an obligation to find out what is going on in the world today, and what is going on particularly in terms of climate and the nature crisis, and then to act on that knowledge. Without that knowledge, how do you know what the appropriate course of action might be? And the thing that I would say is, although the 26 that I've worked with are not as diverse as one might want, they're mostly white, they're mostly entitled, they all acknowledge that they come from a background where education has been critically important to their parents and so on. So they're not pretending to be representative of the world as a whole. But one thing is absolutely clear, that they understand the nature of the connections between social justice and climate campaigning. They are deeply involved in understanding the role of, or the malign influence of colonialism on the capitalist economy of today, and would want to see that brought forward much more by mainstream environmental organizations than they're inclined to do, and feel very, very strong that without an understanding of that, we're never going to make sense of environmentalism today. So they're intersectional by instinct. They respond incredibly powerfully to the suffering that is going on in Gaza and elsewhere, and are all involved in campaigns that seek to widen the scope of conventional environmentalism to get their heads around what justice looks like at that level.
Thank you, Jonathan. Does that help, Shreya? Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. I recently read a figure that 92% of excess emissions are caused and created by the global north. So I was just that part of the question, did you have anything to speak on?
Not really. I mean, these figures, they're what they are. I mean, they tell us that the rich world is primarily responsible for the damage that's being done through the buildup of emissions in the atmosphere. We have to be a little bit careful about these figures because that won't include China, whereas China now is the biggest cause of the emissions. The fact that China and a lot of its emissions come from making the stuff that we buy in the rich world is a subtlety that most people want to overlook. But we're getting what is beginning to fray a little bit is the distinction between the rich north and the poor south. That doesn't really do justice to the ways in which emissions now are profiled in the global economy today. It's a little bit different from that now. Historically, there's not a shadow of doubt about it. Historically, when you look at where the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere come from, that's the 92% figure. But if you look at it now, it's a little bit different.
The next question I put in was, do you think the COP process is still effective? Every time it's criticised for various reasons, should it be replaced with something more effective or something more binding? I mean, every time from Rio to Paris to Copenhagen to Bonn, people say it's not enough, and the more recent ones had so many, just as you explained early on, that the lobbying industry from the petrol states seem to have captured the last one or two. Do we keep up with the COP process? Do we try and replace it with something else? What do you feel there? Have you been to
the COP process will continue come what may, and that's because it's designed to fail. Let's have no misunderstanding about this. I mean, the more visible presence of the fossil fuel interests at the last two COPs has been astonishing, but nonetheless, it's always been there. They've always been involved in ensuring that no single COP ever changes the basic core, the direction of travel, ever makes any difference at all. I think it was not the last one, but the one before that, where the role of fossil fuels as the principal driver of climate change was actually acknowledged for the first time ever. So 28 COPs later, somebody actually says, you know what the problem is? It's burning these fossil fuels. So I've been a massive COP skeptic. I've never been to a COP. Well, I went to Rio.
Okay, yeah.
But that I don't know if that counts as COP1, but anyway, I can't remember. But I haven't been to a single COP since then because it became very clear to me very, very soon that this was being manipulated by extremely powerful interests, where government and fossil fuel incumbency and other banks and the financial sector in general were fixing things up so that nothing really could change. I don't think it's going to make this COP Brazil. It's not going to make any difference. It can't make any difference because it's not designed to make a difference. Could we do something better? Well, we could, but boy, that goes to the heart of what is going to make a difference politically. And if the COPs are all part of the old system, which is clearly not making a difference, then the kind of international agreements we need in future will have to be part of the new politics of climate change.
That's good answers. I mean, every year many people go and it's good networking, but there's also, there's a lot of issues with how the whole system is framed and created in the first place. We've got about another 5 or 6 questions. Just to say to folks, if you want to say your question, but keep it succinct, and we've got about another 20 minutes ish. So Pam, you wanted to ask a question about why is the UK so reluctant to legislate? Pam, do you want to ask Pam Rosling? Do you want to ask that question, Pam Rosling? You may need to unmute. It's Dottie. She can unmute if she needs, can she? Can you hear us, Pam? Maybe I'll just read it there for now, unless Pam's going to pop in. Why is it that the UK is so reluctant to legislate to require renewable energy compared to, e.g., Germany and France in particular, which has approved legislation to require all car parks of more than 80 spaces to to be covered over by solar panels. And apparently that is equivalent to 10 nuclear reactors or something. So all car parks with solar panels. Why is the UK so reluctant to legislate, Jonathan?
I have a residual determination to be fair in some of these discussions. And if I'm going to be fair to the UK government, there hasn't been a historical reluctance to regulate. There's a lot of regulation around climate change here in the UK. Many people would, I think, reasonably persuasively argue that the reason why we were the first ever industrial country to get out of the burning of coal completely was because we imposed a carbon price that made burning coal literally ridiculous. And it accelerated the closure of the few remaining power stations. Now, there were lots of other factors, but don't forget, carbon pricing is part of regulation. It's not just a mechanism to intervene in how any particular part of the energy markets is being shaped. Having been fair, I will now go on to say this is a government as much in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry as every other predecessor government has been. It's clear that Keir Starmer is absolutely wedded to a continuation of the burning of fossil fuels for as long as he and his government can get away with it. Probably fair to say that Ed Miliband, his Secretary of State, is the one who is least comfortable about those ongoing commitments to the fossil fuel industry. But even Ed, with whom I and a couple of people on this call worked through the Sustainable Development Commission, Ed's completely wrapped up in making life a little bit easier for the fossil fuel industry, even as he can see their eventual demise. And we haven't got time, thank God, for anybody this evening to go into this, but the absolute astonishing boondoggle that is carbon capture and storage, where billions and billions of pounds of taxpayers' money here in the UK will go straight into the pockets of fossil fuel companies to strengthen or to create or to somehow make happen this notion of carbon capture and storage as a technology that has been proved to fail time after time after time after time, and will go on failing.
And in fact, that's a relevant point. We had John Fuller on doing a webinar about 4 or 5 months ago. He's a real expert on it and did a very powerful webinar. And strangeness enough, we had the head of the government carbon capture and storage email us for the Department of Carbon Capture and Storage. And he said, is there any chance I could come on and do a webinar for you guys in the interest of, balance thing? I've seen John's Fuller's thing and I'd like to come and put the other side. So we kind of went back and said, well, in interest of balance and fairness, we would be interested in discussing one. So they haven't replied back yet, but let's see. Next question. We thought we'd get him and John on the same platform to play it out. Next question, we got John McClintock from Camden. John, do you want to put your question succinctly about the government measuring our emissions and taxing? Is it John McClintock, Camden? Do you want to read your question there? We've got about 17-20 minutes, guys, so keep it succinct in questions and answers. John, if you want to, if not, I'll read it. What does Jonathan think of the following idea that we or the government measure our emissions and the government offers us an incentive, open brackets, money, tax break, or a signed photo of Sir Keir, if we bring them down, bring down the emissions? I would like to send Jonathan a short paper explaining the idea and receive his reaction, please, from John McClintock in Camden. Apparently he's been trying, he was saying earlier, to contact you via your blog. So I'm sure he'd love to send you this paper. What do you think of that?
Well, good luck. No, I mean, I have to hold my hand up here because at different points in my career as an advocate for sustainable development through Forum for the Future, nearly 20 years ago now, we worked with a company called BP. And guess what? BP took advice from Forum for the Future about how to create its own first ever carbon footprint calculator called Carbon Neutral. Cracking job, obviously. We knew a thing or two about it. Now, at the time, there was a sense still that fossil fuel companies could pivot and could begin to transform themselves into integrated energy companies rather than pure play hydrocarbons. And a lot of people subscribed to that. I think we were not alone in our naivety at that time. And part of BP's readiness to embrace the notion of personal responsibility through personalized carbon footprints, was that this would be part of a growing movement in society to begin to get this shift going towards a world of renewables and so on. Okay, that has all come to naught. And the difficulty about any lifestyle-based measure today is that it just plays into the hands of industries that have to be regulated into extinction. There's no playing softball with these incumbents now. It's far too late for that. And the trouble about any lifestyle initiative is you would be incredibly lucky if you got 5% of the population to sign up and do it with the kind of integrity that you're obviously expecting people to do. You might even have a massive breakthrough and get 10% of people to do it. 90% of people would say, I know this is not going to make a difference. I know the only thing that's going to make a difference is to put these bastards out of business. So I wish you well. I hope your email gets through, but you can probably guess what my answer is going to be.
Okay, that's a long running discussion there. Thank you, Jonathan. I think we've got a next question there just for Penny from James Hewitt. James, do you want to ask your question? Global carbon budget is likely to be exhausted
Oh, gosh.
well before 2050.
No, you carry on, just read it. It's fine.
Okay. The global carbon budget is likely to be exhausted well before 2050, certainly for 1.5 and probably well before 2 degrees C. Emissions have continued to rise since Paris 2015. The impact of climate change is now known to be far worse than anticipated. How should we advocate against government and corporate policies which persist in deeming 2050 to be fine as a fairly allocated target for UK net zero? Well, there's one for you, Jonathan.
I'm laughing because this group of people on this call will understand what carbon budgets are. The vast majority of people involved in the environment movement more broadly will not know what carbon budgets are. And the environment movement is a tiny percentage of the total population of the UK who would have literally no understanding of what carbon budgets are. And that is because governments, not just the UK government, let's be fair, EU as well, all rich world developed countries will not use carbon budget metrics. They prefer to rely on emissions, targets, percentage increases in average temperatures, the whole set of indicators about whether we're succeeding or not. And they don't use carbon budgets. So the media don't talk about carbon budgets. So if you look back on the output measures of what happened in 2024 as to did we have a good year or bad year, almost all the reporting is about increases in emissions, increase in concentrations, increase in investment in fossil fuels, increase in subsidies, increased whatever else it might be. And the idea that we've taken an even bigger chunk out of our remaining carbon budget than we should have done is better gets a look in. Look, there are only two massive meta indicators, I call them, that really matter, and neither will play any part in the deliberations in COP30 in Brazil. First is carbon budgets. And politicians hate carbon budgets because it exposes their inadequacy with a degree of ruthless acuity that you just don't find when you're snared in all of this stuff about concentrations and so on and so forth. And the second is the energy imbalance. And one or two of you on this call will, of course, be better versed in this than I am. But the simple understanding that we're never going to have a stable climate again, ever, until the amount of energy going back out into the atmosphere is equal to the amount of energy coming in through solar radiation. And the data set that shows you the gap that is opening up between incoming energy through solar radiation and then the difference between the energy going out, because more of that energy is then trapped, cannot get out because of the blanket effect, the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That line, which is the growing gap between energy in and energy out, putting it bluntly, is more important than any other single planet indicator. You will never, ever hear a politician refer to it. So we live in the world of blind people. I'm not, this is not me being critical of people. How the hell are they meant to get this stuff?
That's all very good feedback and answer there. A Penny Quilter from the Community Radio Network. Do you want to ask your question? Yeah, with this Penny. And Dottie, people can unmute, can't they? Just double check in there. We've got that on. People can unmute, have we? Penny, can you hear?
Yeah, I have. I've unmuted it. You've got me muddled up. I'm a different Penny.
Okay.
2 pennies worth.
2 pennies. Boom, boom. Ladies and gentlemen, we like the quick jokes here at the CEC Network. Penny, go for it. Ask your question. Penny Quilter.
Penny, if you can raise your hand, it'll be easier to find you.
If you put it so that people can unmute, maybe, if you've done that, Dottie. Yeah, there you go, Penny.
Okay, am I on?
Yes, go for it.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I'm a different Penny from Weymouth, and I think my question was partly answered at the beginning in terms of what are the best actions we can take. I mean, not everyone can take sort of non-violent direct action. Not everyone can be arrested. Some of us, are just can't do that kind of stuff. I'm coming from I understand some of this stuff, Jonathan, but not all of it. I'm totally on board with it, but I just feel having done some non-violent direct action stuff, I feel I'm going backwards now. I feel I'm just doing petitions again, and it's all, it's like, where should we put our energy? It's like there's so many ways you can address this. You've obviously gone for sort of justice, and I guess maybe the answer is, and I'm answering it myself, is that you have to find your particular place. But it's almost like, as a collective, as a movement, where do we put our energy to try and do something that will be meaningful and break through, because it's really hard.
It is really hard. I've genuinely been extremely reluctant to criticize people who find their own point of meaningful connectivity with this agenda, what it means for them, what they can do, how they can make sense. Because you can't, if you criticize that, then you end up basically saying everybody's inadequate and none of us is doing what needs to be done. And for 30 years, I worked with Forum for the Future and the Sustainable Development Commission and the Prince of Wales's Business and Sustainability Program, blah, blah. I was obviously in the heart of a part of the establishment for which nonviolent civil disobedience, direct action, was not part of the deal. But working in that context, I never criticized people who were doing that kind of work. And now that I've happily moved on into the next stage of my life as a sustainability activist, I don't find it particularly helpful to criticize people who aren't in that place. The one thing I would say, and I've got a lot of flack from my Greenie colleagues for saying this. I think the environment movement per se, the mainstream environment movement, has been ungenerous, disrespectful, and mendacious about the importance of nonviolent direct action. And a lot of them have parroted Daily Mail type tropes about what organizations like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion before them have been trying to do. And when I talk to my co-authors, as it were, and I heard some of their experiences of being on the receiving end of really cruel, dismissive, hostile attempts to belittle them, it made me realize that even though I don't expect the mainstream environment movement to come out and support Just Stop Oil and everything it stands for, I sure as hell expect the mainstream environment movement to recognize, respect, and support the contribution that direct action organizations make to our collective movement. That's the very least of the expectations I would have. So there's a sort of nuance there about not wanting to blame people for doing things differently or criticize them for doing them differently. But right now, we know civil disobedience is absolutely crucial to what is happening to democracy in this country. And we can see it playing out with the deeply immoral, insane decision by Yvette Cooper to seek to proscribe Palestine Action as an organization. It's just utterly unbelievable. And many of the climate activists I've been working with are very involved in the Palestinian cause. Many of them will, in as much as they can, without breaking their bail conditions, are part of the de-proscribed Palestine Action. I'm part of that myself now. I'm certainly intending to take more of an active role in that part of the Defend Our Jury's defense of democracy and people's rights to protest. And I don't think it's right for the mainstream environment movement to stand back from that and even to be critical of it.
Thank you. It's just like, yes, we all do what we can do, pushing in the direction. We shouldn't allow anything to be divisive between us. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Shreya, I'm going to ask you, because my connection just dropped, if you could check the next question. I think it was it Jim had a question there, whether Jim wants to, Jim, do you want to unmute and just ask your question? And then Shreya, help me out, who's next after them. And just to say, we need to check with Jonathon. Jonathon, do you have till, well, we usually go to 8, but do you have to 5 past or 10 past?
5 past is fine, yeah.
5 past, all right, let's keep it succinct, ladies and gentlemen. Jim, short question, over. Shorter answers, okay.
Yeah, hello. I often hear of the names of organizations and companies referred to, or even categories like fossil fuel and banks and so on. But I rarely hear the names of individuals who are leading, owning, making decisions in these companies and organizations. And I am wondering, should we not be moving to almost a standard of every time there's a point to be made or a concern to be raised, we name those individuals as well as the organizations and companies?
Yeah, no, why not? One of the ways in which I think the spirit of Just Stop Oil will live on, and there'll be an iteration to come. There's a lot of discussion going on at the moment about where civil disobedience will go next, because the need has obviously not gone away. The urgency is as pressing now as it was whilst Just Stop Oil was in business. One of the things that I'm personally very interested in and supportive of is making private arrests of leading chief executives within the extractive and fossil fuel industries, and making those citizen arrests to personalize it, to say, by virtue of the position you're in, you have to know what is going to happen to the world. And with that knowledge, you have to know the impact that's going to have on humankind. So you are guilty of crimes against humanity. And this is the reason for our citizens' arrest. And I'm kind of taken with that. I hope that particular organization, which is very small and just finding its way in the world, actually grows. I would love to see hundreds of kind of guerrilla squads out there making citizens' arrests.
Well, we're hoping to get Citizens Arrest Network on in the next month or two. I'm chatting to him about getting a date.
It's a really powerful idea. And of course, it doesn't come to anything per se. It doesn't mean that those people will then be subject to prosecution, but the publicity from it and the personalization of it is really important.
It really does have an effect. I had a lady come up who was very upset that XR insurance actions had targeted her husband in the insurance industry, and that he was actually named, and they seemed like it affected them a lot, and maybe that's going to create some change. The people who are destroying the earth, there are people who are involved with making these decisions, and we need to raise awareness. We've got a time for 5 minutes for a few more, so just not too many folks. What do we got? So next up, I think, sorry, I have got the back there. Jim Doherty just did that one. Sat Pilal. I recall being a Friends of the Earth member as a kid in the early 80s and became a chemical engineer who worked in the industry, finance and consulting to government agencies. The profit-making motive, sadly, is king. Yes, we must create well-paid jobs to innovate and reverse the damage at scale. How might we encourage the incumbents to do that? I mean, to me, we've got to push the solutions, but what do you think? How are we going to shift things there, Jonathan? Question from Sat Pilar.
I mean,
Hugh's got his hand up.
yeah, that's a huge question, which is how do you tame capitalism? I spent quite a bit of my life thinking about that question. And it's why I'm less critical than some direct action campaigners are of the so-called green economy advocates, those who are saying that we need to allow capitalism to have this moment where flows of capital and innovation and human knowledge flow into the green economies, both to do with energy systems, built environment, natural systems, and so on. And if you could just redirect the flow of capital into those industries to a massive extent, so we're talking about trillions of dollars being redirected into building inherently more resilient and less unsustainable industries of the future, then our prospects would be better. I'm not going to bullshit here. We've put too much heating into the system to say that our prospects would be good. They won't be. Our prospects are not good. It's going to be a very messy, disrupted future for the whole of humankind. But if we could get that transition going, then honestly, it wouldn't be a bad thing. And also, just the last thing to say about that, Phoenix, is it would deal with the, not deal, but it would provide a set of counter-arguments to the disgusting populism of the likes of Nigel Farage, who is saying that anything to do with the low-carbon green economy is detrimental to the interests of poor working-class people and communities in this country. And for me, the reason why today's Labour Party is such a cataclysmic failure, they're so absolutely bloody stupid, is that if they really thought about this, they would make their engagement and investment in the economy focus entirely on what would happen to the well-being, the skills, the opportunities, the life chances, the community resilience of all of those who have been legitimately have legitimately come to the conclusion that they've been left behind by everything that's gone.
We need to work on all levels, and I think Donica McCarthy, and last couple of Donica or Anna, if we can fit her in, is Donica. I don't know if I'm going to put your question, but you have a very good way of getting on the right-wing media, and you've got a way of saying it. We need to, address the issues of people who are struggling to, to keep paying, dealing with everyday issues as well as the climate issues. Donica, do you want to put your thing there about the billionaire media we need to focus on? And how is it you put it when you get on GB News? You say something about, it's not just about left and right, it's about up and down. Donica, can you hear us?
I need to be unmuted.
Okay, you are. Carry on.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Jonathan.
Hi there.
Yeah, thank you for your analysis. The only thing I would say is that, yes, your analysis that the billionaire oil industry has betrayed us historically, but I think what's missing from that analysis is who gave them the political and social permission to do so. It's my view that if the global corporate media had actually held them to account for that betrayal, they would not have been able to get away with it. And my thesis is that the biggest target that the climate movement has yet to take on fully on board is the global media leadership and their need for them to come on board to help us avoid the disaster that we're facing. One other point I would just, whilst I've got the floor, I would just say I would replace sustainable development with eco-populism as a phrase. Eco-populism is a thesis that says all of our sustainable development and actions and changes must benefit the poor people in our society. And I think that phrase is more accessible than sustainable development. But the key point I want to raise is the role of the media billionaires across the globe in the disaster that we're currently facing. That's where we need to be focusing our attention.
On that note, Media Revolution, folks, that launched this week. Jonathan, over to you.
Well, you spent a large chunk of your life, Donica, dealing with those media barons and the billionaires, and they are not of their own volition going to self-correct and start to inform people who consume their media-based output as to the nature of the crisis and what has caused it and what we need to do now. There is no self-correcting mechanism in the world of billionaire media operations. There's literally none. And out of the 3,008 billionaires that Forbes, the organization that tracks the nature of wealth in our plutocratic economy, out of the 308 billionaires, about 25 are deemed to be directly involved in the ownership of and control over the global media. That's directly. I suspect there are dozens more involved in fixing the media, print, broadcast, and social media. We just start to think about the social media side of it before we start thinking about self-correction. You're not going to get that bunch of narcissistic earth trashers to do anything. This cannot be done other than through the regulated impact that would be achieved, for instance, by limiting the amount of ownership of media. And for me, it's still very controversial. Governments still don't know how to do it. And of course, those very media interests will fight them tooth and nail before they start introducing concentration of media interests, et cetera, et cetera. But we've got to go there. There's no self-correction mechanism. Mm-hmm. It's just a little reminder to us about the frailty of our democracies. 50 years ago, Noam Chomsky, in his wisdom, and he is still an extraordinarily wise guide in our world today. When Chomsky said, when politicians and businesses get together, you can still deal with it through conventional democratic redress and correction in the system. When politicians, business leaders, and the media get together in a kind of malign troika, then you know you're in trouble. And your democracy then is inevitably at some point going to crash and burn.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm just going to offer you two options here. It's 8:07. We can go to final summary from you, or Anna had a question. What do you think what impact do you think the ICJ decision will have?
Well, it's a terrific judgment, and it's well worth for anybody, especially after listening to me, who needs to cheer themselves up. Read the judgment from the ICJ, which was their response to a campaign brought by more than 20 students from Vanuatu and others about what governments owe their citizens to ensure that citizens of small island states, and in fact every nation in the world, do not end up in the situation that Vanuatu has ended up in. And it's beautifully written, it's extremely clear. Governments will wave it away and do sod all about it, but it sits there now. It is there now as a statement, a high-level statement of what a legal system of redress could look like. So I'm not being skeptical about that. For me, it's a really important thing. If I may, Phoenix, I will end by
final comments. Go for it.
Plugging said book out on Thursday last week. It's my attempt to deal with this generational justice issue, and I'm very much hoping that people will buy the book, okay, for themselves, but I hope they'll buy an extra copy of the book to give to someone who needs a little bit of a push to get into a slightly different place. And Phoenix, maybe you can put this in the chat. It's very simple, www.loveangerbetrayal.co.uk, and there's a button there. And you can buy the book from Waterstones or Hive, which means you don't have to go to guess what the great.
Can somebody type that in? Love, Anger, Betrayal. I'm just
www.loveangerbetrayal, which is the title of the book, .co.uk.
Hold it up for them. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you for all your legendary campaigning for the last half century. Absolute maximum respect from the frontline activists and community centre runners over here. I think that's all we've got time for, folks, tonight. Absolutely brilliant session. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And please do network the book. Absolutely fantastic. Loads of great information in there, and Jonathan's wealth of deep knowledge from all down the years.